And now, welcome to Stay at Home and Brew It. We are coming to you live from
The
Texas,
headquarters of Texas Brewing Inc.
the only place that you need to shop for all your home brewing needs.
All of your home brewing needs start here. I'm Brock Tornga. With me today is
Jeff Perot, also known as Jeff the Pirate.
Jeff the Pirate is with me.
So today on Stay at Home and Brew It, we're going to talk about something which actually one of y'all requested us to go into, and we appreciate your suggestions for topics and such. In one of our episodes, I can't remember which one it was, Brock, you'd mentioned the fact that you had a certain strain of yeast that you've stored and that you have been storing for quite some time, and you love it, you've been brewing with it, and you've been quite successful. And somebody asked if we could talk a little bit more about long-term storage of yeast.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, as a home brewer, always whenever I go to get my stuff, I always want the freshest yeast possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it seems a little bit weird for me, the idea of...
Why would you want to use the freshest yeast possible?
Well, I've always wanted to use the freshest yeast possible because, from the way I understand it, the viability of yeast begins to decrease as time goes on.
Okay.
No matter how if it's kept cold storage or how it's handled, that the viability of it goes down even almost every day.
Okay.
Is that not true, or?
No, I would say that that's accurate. Absolutely. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the lifespan of these yeasts. Generally, when we're talking about brewing, we have either dry yeast or wet yeast.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. So let's talk about the lifespan of our normal dry yeast. This is some regular, USO5
Mm-hmm.
from Fermentis. Do you know how long? Do I need to refrigerate this?
I've always. Well, it's interesting because when I came here to the shop, of course, it's in the refrigerator.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever I've used dry yeast in the past, I've never refrigerated it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So now it's always going to keep. A refrigerator, you got to look at it like anything that you put in your refrigerator. It's always going to keep something more fresh, right? So you're going to extend the life cycle of that yeast. But we actually had the rep from Fermentis come in, and what he told us was astounding. I don't even want to tell anybody how long this stuff is really viable. But warm, it actually can be okay for up to 6 months with absolutely no loss of viability in dry yeast.
Okay.
So that's a good long time. Now, just to kind of safeguard that, we're always going to want to, put that in our fridge. And I always actually keep a couple of packets of this around just in case something else doesn't attenuate.
Okay.
If I can catch that early enough, I'll go ahead and throw in a little USO5 just to help that, finish that beer or something. So it's a good idea. But I always kind of keep it in the fridge just to make sure that, I know that yeast is going to be there and it's going to be fresh.
Okay.
However, the life cycle outside of the fridge on dry yeast is going to be lengthy.
Okay.
It's going to be very lengthy, which is a nice thing if you're in a pinch. And so that's another thing too. With you guys ordering at home, I see a lot of times somebody has ordered, 5 packets of USO5 or something, and you only need to order 1 ice pack with that if you're even worried about that at all. It's definitely not necessary to have 6 ice packs,
No.
For 6, dry yeast. In fact, you probably don't need an ice pack at all. You can just save that money or use it towards something else. Now, it does get really hot here, so if you're concerned with that, that's something I would want to safeguard. Again, it's your beer, all right? So you believe what you believe. You research it. But
You do you.
But it is okay at room temperature. Now, I will say that I don't think that they recommend that it is in a range of heat like we have in Texas.
Okay. So wouldn't want to throw it in the back of my car and
Leave it there for a few weeks.
Yeah, when it's 102 outside and probably 130 inside my car.
I would say no. I would say absolutely not.
Okay.
Now, and we have a ton of different dry yeasts here too, so there's a lot of options available to you if you're using dry yeast, and I think we've talked about that
We have.
before. So
What about building a starter with dry yeast?
that is unnecessary, actually. Michael had just come by and had asked about building a starter with dry yeast, and he actually brings a good point. But for the cost of this yeast, was this maybe $4 for a pack of this or something like that? If you're doing a high gravity beer, I always tell people this too. I like anything over about 1056 to
Okay.
1060. then I'll start thinking about pitching 2 packets of yeast. So just keep that in mind whenever you're buying our kits and you're looking at that. Generally, we'll recommend that that's what it is, but just kind of as a rule of thumb, I would even say maybe 1060.
Okay.
This is going to work well for that in one package. But anything over that, you start getting into higher ABV stuff, go ahead and pitch 2 packets of dry yeast. Now, you can't make a starter with dry yeast, can you? Have you ever attempted anything like that?
Actually, I have.
Have you?
I have.
And were you able to do so?
I was able to do so. I don't think it necessarily. I don't think it was that advantageous. I really don't think that it helped my beer that much to make a starter with the dry yeast.
Now, did it take off just the same way that we do with our wet starters, or?
I'm trying to think if it did. I mean, it's been a long time since I've done it.
Okay.
and
But
I
again,
honestly don't
for
remember.
for $4 or whatever, to just get another packet and go ahead and pitch it in there is
Yeah.
fine. Now, what is your view on rehydration?
Okay.
Do our customers need to rehydrate?
I would say the
dry
majority
yeast?
of customers, you do not need to rehydrate the yeast. And yet, I mean, I know sometimes on the packets or in the instructions on the yeast manufacturer's website, it will recommend to do so. That's actually not necessary to do. You're not going to lose viability at all it's very slightly.
Yes, I don't think. I mean, I'm sure that there is some, and my Fermentis rep is probably going, you guys have no idea what you're talking about right now. But if it is, I don't think that you are ever going to notice it as a home brewer. And I'm not saying like that's a bad thing. We're home brewers. We don't need to worry about these little fractions of numbers. But that would only be for massive quantities, right? If you had to, if you were trying to get that attenuation for a beer in a quantity like that. So they actually do recommend, Fermentis does, but the rep himself told me that you don't have to worry about doing that. You can just open your packet, sanitize your packets, what I like to do, open it, pitch it right over the top, and you're good to go. So the lifespan on that should be a good long while. And if you're ever worried about it, generally there's going to be a date on the packet itself.
Should we put it on the Tyler cam?
Down, maybe on the Tyler cam. Does
Okay.
that one
Is the
have,
Tyler cam working okay?
does that one have that on there?
Yeah, it does. All right.
Move it a little towards the front. There.
Okay. So you can see the date as Brock was talking about is right here at the bottom.
And what does that date say then?
Up a little more?
Right here?
Yeah.
Okay. That date actually says, let's see, April of 2023.
April of 2023.
It's a long time.
So we're talking about the lifespan of dry yeast now, and on that packet there's an expiration date of 2023. So we know that that's probably pretty fresh USO5 there. I've got some T58 here. This is 09 of 2022. So if that gives you any kind of indication on how long this yeast is actually viable. Now, I would say I would probably want it cold if I was going to store it for 3 years before using, but that's a good long lifespan of that dry yeast. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So, on the other end of the spectrum,
We got the liquid yeast.
we have the liquid yeast. Now, when we get to liquid yeast, this is going to be a heck of a lot more. It's going to decompose a lot faster, right? It's going to be a lot more fragile. And in that case, then absolutely, I would want to store this cold. I wouldn't want this to be left out for any other reason than bring it to pitch temperature if I'm doing an ale. For my beer that day, or whatever. And I would recommend at least 30 minutes. What did they recommend?
Let's see, on My Yeast, they say at least let it stand for at least 3 hours at 70 degrees in order to swell. So yeah, they say about 3 hours.
So I've got Casey Kirkpatrick here, and he actually says that he made a dry yeast starter with proper starter and had the same results as only using dry yeast.
Okay.
So that guy makes a lot of beer, so that's probably.
Okay, but now of course with the liquid yeast, as I've always understood it, you've got a lifespan with it.
You've got a lifespan with it.
Okay, and oftentimes on the package it'll have a date in which it was manufactured, or actually some of the Y yeast actually have a best if used by.
Yes. And I believe that's just changed, right? They used to put the manufacturer date on there.
Yeah.
But again, that's going to give you a pretty good indication. Now, here at the shop, what we like to do is we never really keep a yeast strain in-house that's more than 5 months old.
Okay.
Okay, we try to get you guys the freshest yeast that we possibly can from when we get it. Now, Omega is actually, when they're in their full swing, they do homebrew pitches, and they do them so their turnaround is so fast that you can get yeast from them almost the next week.
Oh, wow.
Which is really nice. You get very, very fresh yeast out of it. Now, if I have an old package of yeast that's been in my fridge at a constant temperature, how long would you say that was good for? Is it would you not use it anymore then after the 5
After the
5 or
5 months?
6 recommended months?
I wouldn't.
Okay. Now, I wouldn't either. Now, just alone, we're talking about not making a starter,
Correct.
right? We're talking about just pitching
Yeah,
that yeast.
I wouldn't use it. Yeah, I wouldn't use it alone. Now, if I was gonna use it, I mean, for instance, this is one of My Yeast's private collection strains. So it's one of those ones that they release seasonally. And I think if I found a packet of this and it was it's 5-6 months old and I really wanted to be able to use it, I'd pitch a starter with it to see if it's still viable and still good.
Absolutely. But by itself, we don't know for sure, and that yeast will degrade more and more as time goes on, and that's one of those things where, hey, if I'm not going to make a starter, which we always recommend to do, if you're going to use the wet yeast for every one of your beers, I would absolutely recommend using that. Now, you can take 2 packets and pitch 2 packets. Now we're talking about, they're $7.95 a piece. We're talking about, some money layout for one single beer to pitch 2 packets of that yeast. But if you can, to try to get the freshest yeast, if you're going to pitch straight from here, right? Now, if I do have something that this date is starting to expire, say I'm around that 5 months, and I go to make my beer and I look at my yeast package and it's off like that, then that's the time, right? We would absolutely want to make a starter, correct?
Yes, you want to make yourself a starter. Make sure that the yeast is awake and happy and doing its thing, so that you would not want to just go ahead and pitch it directly. You need to do a starter.
Did you want to say anything quickly about starter making at all? Maybe just reiterate.
Well, for starters,
I like it. That's nice.
If you want to find out more about starters, actually, we shot an episode. It was one of our first ones about how to do starters. Stubby actually filmed it and was the star of it. So take a look back at some of our clips, and you can find the one that we did on starters. He has a lot of good information about how to do those, and so definitely take a look at that.
Okay, I like that.
Now, moving on, if I want to determine, okay, I've got a date, on the Omega yeast, or I got a date here on the Y yeast. Is it just that I count, the months or days since it was manufactured to know whether it's viable, or, let's say I've got some money I want to do something with. Are there some things that I might be able to get that would help me to determine the viability of my yeast that might involve a little bit of cash outlay?
Yeah, absolutely. So even as a home brewer, you can do these things too. And what we did is we just set up a little lab. I had a older desk. It was covered in marble, which is a nice surface there. So, and anytime I'm going to talk about doing building yeast, or if we're going to be doing yeast counts or something, I like to keep a little flame near this. It's going to help keep everything out of from getting in there, especially if I'm using my slant, taking my slant open, and we're trying to do something with that, or do cell counts on old yeast strains. And we'll kind of get to the fact of the storage, but there are some things you can do, and if you do have some cash, you can line this out pretty simply. I think for around $500 you can get a good lab setup to test your cell count and your yeast. So there's a couple of things you would need a microscope, okay? And it doesn't have to be the most fantastic microscope ever, just so long as it can see the cells, right? Those microorganisms. And then they also have something called I always get this wrong. Hemocytometer is what it's called. And it's a slide, just a regular glass slide that's going to go on that microscope. And it actually has a grid on it, okay? It kind of looks like a tic-tac-toe board almost, okay? And what you're going to do is you're going to put your yeast on there, or a sample of your yeast on that slide, and you're going to use a little methylene blue, okay? And so just a dab of that in there. And what that blue is going to, it's like a dye, basically.
Okay.
And so the yeast cells that are dead, that the cell wall has perished or has some sort of puncture or something wrong with it, it's going to allow that dye in there. Okay. Well, what this is going to do when I have my sample down is I can look through my microscope at this grid, and I can actually physically count how many viable cells are in each one of these little boxes. And then they usually come with, there's some good programs out there for your computer, calculator or something like that, and you can plug that into your calculator and it will tell you how many cells are viable still. So this can be done at a home brew level. It doesn't have to be done in a lab, as long as you're working very, very clean, very, very sanitized. This is something that you can do, and you, like I said, the most expensive thing is going to be that microscope. The slide itself, they're usually around $100, but it will last you pretty much forever as long as you don't break them. I have seen breweries that have used them for years and years and years. So it wouldn't be that big of a deal. So our yeast, though, I've got this 5-month-old yeast. I want to make a starter. Is it going to matter if that yeast is 5 months old?
The starter's it's gonna take a little bit of time to take off sometimes.
Okay.
You're gonna have to kind of nurture it a little bit. Like sometimes if you have a fresh packet of yeast and you're doing a starter, I mean, I can have the starter. I can do it like the night before.
Right, the night before, and then the day of, boom, it's
exactly.
And you're gonna know whenever you make your starter too. It will change colors from kind of a the yeast itself, different strains are going to have a different color to it, but generally it's going to be a little bit of a darker brown, and when that yeast takes off, you're going to visually see a difference. It's going to be light colored, it's going to be very creamy looking. You're going to see that yeast has grown in there, budded and multiplied, and that you have a lot more of it going in your starter. So it's one of those things like, well, how do I know if you're gonna visually see that difference, and it is going to light up and start looking really creamy and nice. So that's a good indication. And then generally you're gonna get like a on the top, you're gonna get some bubbles, some micro bubbles and stuff like that from that yeast starting to do its thing. Now, if it's crossed into the second phase of its lifestyle, if it's gone anaerobic and it's starting to really consume all the sugar in there, that creusen's going to start to form, and we want it to stop. Okay. At that point, right, and cold crash, because we don't want that going through there, eating, stressing that yeast before we've used it in our beer. At least I don't want to, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So, but what's nice is we actually did an experiment, and we took 1056, one packet of 1056, and we had it 1 month out, and we made a starter with it, and we did a cell count. And we did that on 2 months out.
Okay.
Then we did 3 months, and so on and so forth. Now, after a yeast starter was made, it may have taken a little longer for that yeast to propagate, but we had no problem within a year of that date getting it back and getting the exact same cell count for viability.
Wow.
Even though that yeast was a year old. So now, as long as that yeast was stored properly.
Okay.
Okay. So you can do it. You can absolutely use that stuff. Now, if I was a brewery or if I was really serious about my beer, I would want to take that cell count. I would want to. Okay, we've gone ahead and we've grown that. Now, with 1056, do I want to do that? No, it's not necessarily something I would set out to do. However, like you said, this was one of their. They have these.
They're seasonal strains.
They're seasonal strains, and I might not be able to get my hands on that strain all the time. So if you can, keep a packet like this in your fridge, you can always grow that yeast back. Now, what I was talking about on the show was storing my yeast, and what I like to do is when I get a funky strain or something that I can't get my hands on a lot, what I like to do is I like to go ahead and sanitize everything, make my starter, and then I'll take mason jars, wide mouth pint mason jars.
Just standard one like I could buy at a grocery store?
Yeah, I picked them up at Walmart and stuff like this.
Okay.
And sanitize all of that stuff. And again, with your area, work really, really, really clean. Sanitize everything, and we're going to be dealing with our yeast for storage.
Now, are you sanitizing with like Acisan, or are you sanitizing with bleach? Or?
Yeah, no, I think that
Okay.
that is completely fine. I would clean everything first, clean your surface area, and then sanitize with the Acisan or the Star San, something that's got that phos in there, something that's going to kill those microorganisms. Now, again, it always helps too if you get that flame. What is that?
A little like Bunsen burner kind of
Yeah,
thing?
little
or-
Bunsen burner looking thing. It's really nice, and what that does is it just pushes away any kind of dust particle or something like that that could come in. So it's nice to work with one of those.
Could I use my whale blubber oil lamp that I've got?
I don't think that'll, like a
No?
candle or something isn't going to have enough
Okay.
output, right, to really kind of push in that space way. So you would really want to use some like the little, is it a Bunsen burner? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Which is perfect. And again, you know, if you're getting lab equipment and that sort of thing, you have to be really careful with it. But it will kind of keep out of the small area that you're working with, dust particles and stuff
Okay.
aren't able to come in.
Yeah, one of the things y'all can look at is I've had people say, oh, you know, there's no dust particles in my house. You know, my house is a clean house. You know, where I live is very clean, and I'm sure your place is clean. But I think all of us have had those moments where you know you have a shaft of sunlight that comes into your room or a kitchen or something like that, and you see all these little floaty
particles
things.
and yes things
Yeah.
in there. Or your AC kicks on and everything that's been sitting in that filter now is moved
Oh,
out
yeah.
into your house. And that's the reason I say now you're going to have too terribly much of a problem with this, but we're talking about wanting to store this yeast, so any microorganisms that we can keep out of there.
Okay.
And that's why I say it's nice to have that little Bunsen burner going during this time. But sanitize those mason jars, sanitize
Okay.
everything, have it ready to go. And then I simply just pour, like I'll do a 2-liter starter and I'll pour that into my jars.
Okay.
Make sure there's a little headspace at the top in case something does happen, or if they start warming up, the yeast starts kind of coming back alive a little bit or something, then you'll have pressure in there, and it'll, I've had, especially with like some Hefeweizen strains, it's, a little more aggressive kind of a strain, something like that. It'll, maybe warm up a little bit, and it'll actually blow the top on that can. And if that happens, then I've allowed oxygen to get back in there. Not a good thing. But I will leave just a tiny little bit of headspace and close that up. And then at that point, label it. Write the date on there, write what it is and how many times that you've made this yeast starter. Then I've been able to have several got several samples of this yeast strain at that point. So
Gotcha.
This is something I can't get my hands on a lot, right?
Sure.
So now I've done this with a strain that I got back in 2014. And we do take cell counts on it and look at the health of the cells as well, because they will kind of modulate and stuff over time, and when that happens, it's no longer really that yeast strain that you're looking for anymore.
Okay.
Or it's changed enough where you're going to start to get different flavor compounds, or it's modified. So we do like to look at it. But I've had the same yeast strain going just like this, and we've always taken very, very good care of it.
Okay.
Kept it at at a certain temperature and cold in a sanitized jar. But as long as you keep that, I can pull that out, make my starter, decanter that off with one of those, and I can regrow that into a viable starter to use for my beer.
Okay.
So that's a long time. So if you're not doing cell counts and really looking at your yeast, I wouldn't recommend it. I also
Okay.
wouldn't recommend it if we're doing a 1056, just get yourself a fresh strain.
Okay. So, like for instance, the strain that you have that you've had for quite a few number of years now, is that something where you are keeping that original strain in a mason jar, or do you have
No,
some sort of?
I haven't actually slanted it, but I've kept it in that jar, right?
Okay.
And I've never actually stressed it either, so it's never really ever made a beer. The only thing that I've ever done with it is grown a starter. So
Okay.
I've gotten it to the point where it's in its aerobic stage, where all it's done is eat nutrients and oxygen and been comfortable.
Okay.
And that's where it's going to multiply and bud, and you're going to get that that nice multiplication of that yeast. Before it's gone over to the anaerobic side, which it's run out of all that, started to consume all the sugars and has been stressed.
Okay.
Now you can wash the yeast, but I would never use that for this.
Okay.
Right? I could maybe wash that strain, use it for about 3 generations, and then I would want to pitch it and get rid of it, because it is going to modulate. It's going to, is going to change.
So then the original strain that you have in that mason jar that you can get all the other ones off of, do you then come back on a regular basis and feed it?
Yeah,
Or-
absolutely. I would
Okay.
grow it into a starter and then, use up your starters. I always try to keep a couple of them around just in case something were to happen. But I still always have that original starter.
Okay, and you go back and feed it on a regular basis?
Yeah, absolutely. I would
Okay.
grow it again, crash it, but again, never stress it out on a beer. Never get it to the point where it's in its anaerobic stage.
Gotcha, okay. So, there's not necessarily any, you're just using dry malt extract and stuff to feed it and take care of it, or are you doing nutrient additions? or-
I will feed it a little bit of yeast nutrients.
Okay.
And I've been using My Yeast beer nutrient
Okay.
as well. That's it. I like to use the Pilsen because there's no color to it. And I've noticed I love proper starter. I will use proper starter. It shortens the game. It is wonderful. I make a yeast starter with every single wet yeast that I get. And
Yeah.
I pretty much only use wet yeast at this point. But I'm going to make a starter every single time.
Okay.
And when I'm in a pinch, man, pop the cop on that, put it in there, and you're good to go. But if it's something to where I'm going to want to store it, I'm going to want to do it the old school way just so that I know that I've had full control over what my wort was that I fed it. And I wouldn't want to feed it a golden light or anything darker because I'm going to start to pick up flavors. I'm going to start to pick up colors from that as well.
Okay.
So we want to keep as much of that out as there. We're trying to keep that yeast strain as true as we possibly can.
Sure.
Now, I'm not a lab, I'm not a microbiologist, so there are going to be things that can make its way into that. So you have to be very, very careful when you're doing these sorts of things. But in that case, we're talking about the lifespan on liquid yeast. I've had it since 2014. That's a pretty good lifespan that
really
I've
good.
had for liquid yeast.
Yeah.
But I've taken those steps to make sure that that's kind of what has happened. So.
Yeah. So, for those of y'all who are just kind of coming in and joining us, we're talking about long-term storage of yeast and the fact that Brock has a strain that he's been keeping around since 2014. And this is something which we can do as home brewers that you can do at home. And we mentioned the idea of using proper starter. If you've never heard of that before, check out our website. You can order it. It is a fast, wonderful, easy way to to do a starter.
Yeah, it's great. You sanitize your can in a 16-ounce bottle of water, put it together, throw it into your sanitized Erlenmeyer flask, and pitch your yeast.
Yep.
And you've got a starter going.
There's no messing with boiling DME on the stove, worried about that one time that you look away and it boils over on the stove and then somebody wants to kill you that lives with you.
Yeah, not to mention the time that it takes to do that, too.
Yeah.
And then really the big amount of time there is cooling that wort back down in an ice bath before you can pitch your yeast in there.
Oh, yeah.
With a proper starter, you've already got it at room temperature. And you go. Now, I will tell you, it's nice in these Y yeast packages. They have a little nutrient in there, and a lot of times when you smack that, you can tell if your yeast is viable again because that yeast it'll start to blow up inside of that pack. Now, it doesn't always have to do that, but it's just an extra kind of a little thing I think is neat that those guys do.
Now, since you talked about the idea that you have your original yeast and then you've got the ones that you've split off into the various mason jars for starters and such. Do you have if I did this at home, could I store them in just my regular kegerator or my fridge, or along with with my vegetables and fruits and stuff, or do you have like a dedicated fridge for that? Or?
I do.
Okay.
We have a dedicated fridge only for our yeast. I know this sounds ridiculous, but at one point we were making so much beer, and we had kind of the yeast strains that we were using all of the time on hand.
But
And
no
so
more than 200 gallons per person per household per year.
No, absolutely not. I think we were making exactly 200 gallons is exactly what we were doing. But that's a lot of homebrew for one guy to make.
Yes.
And then my next guy, he made 200 gallons of beer, and my other guy in my team made 200 gallons of beer. So we were making a lot of beer. Yeah. So storage space needed. I think definitely something in there. Now, could you get away with it? Yeah. I mean, your mason jar is sealed.
Okay.
I do kind of like to keep them, at a current temperature without that thing opening all the time, getting warm or something like that. But I think you could get away with that if you had something. But if you didn't have the optimal, I think it would still work.
Okay.
As long as you were working carefully. And I think cleanliness is probably the biggest thing here whenever we deal with yeast, and in the breweries too. That's like anytime they deal with yeast brings. I mean, it's a serious deal.
I bet.
I mean, it always is very sanitary, but when you deal with yeast, it goes.
Oh yeah, one, because yeast is expensive. It really is.
Absolutely.
And it's one of those things to where, if this is something you'd maybe like to do at home, as Brock is talking about, it's something you definitely can do. It'd be into something nice, which, especially with seasonal strains or difficult to find ones, those are, great great ones to be able to have on hand when you may not want to brew it right now, but, you may want to be able to brew it when the strain is not available anymore.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I would say too, if you're really, really interested in this, there's also a technique that's called slanting.
Okay.
Okay, and that was probably the best way to go. It's going to take a little bit more equipment too, and there are some great videos on slanting yeast strains out there. But you can keep a yeast strain for forever. I mean, it's a live organism, so as long as you kept it fed and healthy and clean, it's something that you can do.
Now, Casey's asking, what temperature are you keeping the yeast at?
I would say probably your regular fridge temp would be optimal. Would be okay. You wouldn't want to go too cold. You definitely don't want to freeze it. If you freeze it, it's going to die.
Mm-hmm.
So anywhere in that, I don't know, what is your fridge set at? 34?
Yeah, anywhere
38?
from like 34 to 38.
I would say that is probably your optimal temperature.
Yeah. And kind of a follow up with what Brock is saying. We occasionally get questions from people that'll say, I froze my yeast, or accidentally my yeast got frozen. Is it still good? And the answer is no.
Yeah, generally it's going to be dead. I mean, you could always put together a starter, check it out, see if that yeast starts growing again. But yeah, that happened to us actually one summer. Our fridge just went crazy. Thing froze all of our yeast strains, everything in there. Had to pitch our entire catalog of yeast strains. It was dead. It was all dead. Because it was frozen. So, and the same thing will happen too with the dry strains, or with the wet strains. If you get too warm in there, that yeast will just start dying. So, I mean, that's the reason we cool our wort down to to room temperature before we pitch it. The yeast it's a fragile thing. It's a fragile microorganism, and it's going to die if it's not really extremely happy. So, it is a little temperamental.
It is, and some strains are a little more temperamental than others. I know some of the saison strains can be a little bit finicky.
Yep. Yes, they can. Yes, they absolutely can. So I think in closing, I think this is something that this is open up. This is open to you. It is something that somebody can even do on a small budget. Something that you can check out doing might even save you a little bit of money. And if it's not your thing, just roll your starter and do it. But you get into like. We had these beers on our list that we absolutely couldn't, live without, and I couldn't get these yeast strains for them anymore. So that's kind of where it pushed us into wanting to discover other ways to be able to store that yeast. So.
Well, and hopefully we never find ourselves again in a situation like we have recently with all the coronavirus stuff.
Yeah.
That some yeast companies shut down business for a while. We weren't able to get anything from Omega. Well, we still haven't gotten any shipments yet. I think we have one maybe coming this week.
So I know that they're open now, and we have ordered, so we should hopefully be getting some Omega back in stock. So all you Hornadol fans and stuff out there, we're going to get the Kavaiks back in here really soon.
But this would be something that is a nice thing to have in your back pocket, something you might want to try, because sometimes there are strains that you can only get every once in a while, like the seasonal strains from My Yeast, or like I said, hopefully it doesn't happen again. But if something else comes through and Omega closes down for a short time, or even Y Yeast closes down for a short time, you'll be good for yeast.
Absolutely. So, do you have any stories or things in growing yeast of strange things that happened to you that you could share?
Let's see. About the only things I can think of. Let's see. Well, there are two things I remember. One was actually was trying to get a strain from a bottled beer, a beer that was bottle conditioned.
Okay.
And I was trying to get the strain of yeast that was in that, and so I collected very carefully decanted the beer, and it was a Belgian style beer.
So there was some lees in the bottom then.
Correct.
Some sediment.
Correct. And so actually from that pitched into a starter and actually got it growing. But I did all this work, and I mean, I
Now,
carefully stepped
did
it
you
up.
drink your beer and what was in the bottom? Chunked it right on into the, to the starter, or
Well, not exactly. I mean, what I ended up doing, so I decanted it in my glass,
okay?
and then at that point, swirled the rest of it, and then put that into a starter, which I'd already prepped. I'd already prepped this is before the proper days. So, I had already boiled up my DME and chilled it down and had everything in my flask and was ready. And so, once I had done that, put it in there, and I had to step it up, and it was, it was quite a bit of work. But I did all this, and then started doing some reading, and found out that the yeast that particular brewery used for the bottle conditioning of their beer was not the yeast that they fermented with. So I looked at it, I was like,
So all you had was bottle conditioning.
I just had bottle conditioning yeast, which for all I know could have been USO5.
Okay. But you were able to get this to grow again, and
I was.
So I've heard of people propagating from beer bottles.
It was not
I've
easy.
always wanted to try that. And I wonder if you would be able, if there's enough yeast in a little bit of beer yet to be able to grow that. Do you think that that's a
I don't know, like for instance, if we wanted to, this Hop Skinny that we have right now,
which is a low calorie IPA?
yeah, we're trying to keep the Corona pounds off.
Yes, thin down a little bit.
I don't know. I've never tried that before. I mean, I know there's some breweries that filter their beer, which, I mean, depending, I guess, upon how they filter it, could strip out most, if not all, the yeast.
Yeah. Okay. So that might be something to look at. If I've got this yeast, I want to do a saison de pont, and I want that strain, and I want it direct from the bottle. You may look in there and see if do they bottle condition or not. So there's always going to be some sediment in the bottom of that. So that would be fun to try.
It was neat. I mean, it was a lot of work, but it was kind of fun to do until I found out that it was not the strain of yeast I was wanting.
You just got some CBC1 in there,
Probably.
and you're good to go.
But what you can also do is you can actually also reach out to the yeast companies and tell them, I'm wanting a yeast, that is similar to, this, what's used to make this beer, and actually a lot of their strains are the exact strains that are being used, like in Westmalle and some of those.
Right.
But they won't tell you that.
Right.
But you can ask them, okay, what would be a yeast you'd recommend to get me close to making, Westmalle Double? And they say, this is the one you'd want to try.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's not going to be a proprietary thing, right? I mean, it's a live organism, and there can only be so many strains. So
Yeah.
and that's another thing too. So like the USO5, is that is that 1056? Is that the exact same strain? Yeah, it's American ale strain, right?
Yeah.
So those strains are out there, and there's cloned strains as well from other companies. But I don't see any questions. I must have bored everybody to death.
Nah.
So,
when Eric said something about different kind of pitching yeast.
Eric, what are you talking about, man? Different kind of pitching yeast.
That could be, what I was talking about, in the sense that the yeast was not, the yeast in the bottle was not the yeast they fermented with.
Oh,
or they
okay,
pitched.
yeah.
And there are a few other places I think that do. I think Sierra Nevada does that, because oftentimes their beers are bottle conditioned or conditioned in the bottle, and the yeast I think that they use for conditioning it is different, I think, than what they ferment it with.
Okay, that makes sense. Absolutely. So I would just say, get out there and try some things. Try some different yeast strains in your beer. If you've got a beer that you absolutely love, this is kind of what we're talking about in the malts and stuff. I love this beer. I'm stuck to this one grain that I've always used, but there's another Pilsner malt out there.
Yeah.
There's another yeast strain from another company out there that might attenuate a little bit faster, and that allows you to get your beer done a little quicker, or maybe it's just it's got a little softer taste on the feel. And that's another thing with these yeast strains too that I've found between companies. I've liked one better than the other. I gotta give a shout out to my buddy, dude, Chris Clow's on. My man, Chris Clow. Anyway, but yeah, so even between the companies and stuff, a similar strain is going to still give you a little bit different. This one may come off a little tinnier than the last one. This one may be a little softer than the last one. I would get out there and I would try several different ones in your beer and see how it goes. Make the same beer 3 times and use 3 different yeast strains on it. We actually just had We just did a big brew here at the shop. We did 40 gallons on a system that we've been cobbling together for a little while, and we were fortunate enough to have the guys down at Cowtown help us with the horse with no name recipe. And so we did this beer, and we took it and we split it. I mean, what did we do? 5, 6 different
Let's see, we
yeast
did
strains.
2 different saisons. I think
We did a Belgian. I did the 3470. I think.
Yeah, I did the 3470 as
we've
well.
done the S23.
Yeah, so 2 different lager strains.
1056.
Okay, and
Here's
Tyler
regular
did
1056, made an ale. So it was really, really neat, and these beers are just starting to finish up now, so it's going to be really interesting to see. You know, we did the same base beer, the same wort, and just fermented them all differently. I'm absolutely excited, and I'm sure we'll be telling you guys how these things came out, but try some different things. Get out there, and if you're looking for yeast storage, or again, like that brewing on a budget, I think is where I brought this up for yeast storage, to try to save a little bit of money doing that. Those things are possible for you as well. So is there anything else you wanted to add?
Not that I can think of.
Okay.
Except, we appreciate you being with us, and we appreciate you watching the videos and your orders and everything. Don't forget to check out some of the other videos on brewing on a budget, which Brock had mentioned. We have the starter video, and we've got a lot more that we've shot. We've got more coming up this week. We're going to revisit hops with Stubby and get his take on some things with hops.
Awesome. Yeah, the last time I saw Stubby, he was rubbing them all over his face. So, so he's probably a professional on that.
I think so.
But yeah, no. So we've got a lot of exciting things. We've tried to do about a video a day, except for Mondays. Mondays have just been crazy busy for us. Again, guys, just we appreciate you so much here. You keep your orders coming, and we'll keep filling them for you. Any questions that you may have, feel free to call the shop, talk to any one of us. If you have any questions for us, we'll do our best to get that resolved if anything's going on with your beer. And also, we're trying to do the best customer service that we possibly can. So I know we're stuck under these kind of conditions. So far, our storefront still is not open. It looks like we might kind of revisit that sometime in June, but as for now, guys, if you'll just bear with us, if there's anything we can do for you, please, we would like to resolve it over the phone if we can, but just bear with us as we kind of finish out our internet orders. You guys have been absolutely swell about working with us and getting those all done. So we appreciate that a lot. And maybe share a video or two to your buddies if they brew, get them involved. We'd love to hear from them and see what beers that they're doing out there. So yeah, I would say stay safe,
Stay at home.
and brew it.
Cheers.
Cheers.